Mm.
All right, welcome everybody to our October virtual tasting for the Forgotten Grapes Wine Club. No, do not adjust your sets. Allison and I are not in different boxes. We are actually together in the same room for the first time on one of these virtual tastings. Amazing. I know several of you had lots of questions as to how I was going to be on the virtual tasting when I was doing deliveries today. Well, this is how we're doing it.
How
So
did you do that?
And Patty just, when he misspeaks, I can now hit him right in place.
and she will, and I will sue. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping things. We are moving full speed ahead with the Festival of Forgotten Grapes. It is once again going to be, we're moving the date slightly this time. It's going to be on Saturday, March 29th. Once again, it'll be at Frankie LA in downtown LA, same venue we had last year. They were great to us. We've got 20 something wineries signed up already, including some new ones. For those of you who attended this year, we've got some brand new wineries that are going to be there, which were,
And some repeat wineries.
of course,
Yes, absolutely.
we have some brand new wineries that also implies
But
that there have to be.
specifically this lovely man here.
True, yes. So we're excited to have Vega Vineyard and Farm back with us again for next year. Tickets are going to go on sale November
1st. Wow.
So yes, keep an eye out for that email.
And we raised the price just a little bit, but we're offering a little more value in those. So it should be, you should be pretty excited with everything that'll be included.
Yeah, we've got a lot of fun new things we're going to be doing for the second edition, which we're looking forward to. But once again, all the great wines, all the lesser known and uncommon varietals, no Cab, no Merlot, no Chard, no Pinot, none of that foul stuff. Only fun, forgotten grapes out there. So keep an eye out for that, but definitely put Saturday, March 29th on your calendar.
Good Christmas gifts.
Yes, exactly. Perfect. Okay, I am going to hand it over to this person sitting to my left for the first time ever, not a dog, surprisingly, as it normally is, to introduce our featured winery and winemaker of the month.
I don't think he needs much of an introduction, but I'm a huge fan because I think when it comes to one of the loveliest people I know in the wine business, it's this gentleman, Steve Clifton. I met Steve when I first got into the wine industry about 20 plus years ago, when I was doing wine trips up to Santa Barbara, taking consumers up on day trips. And Steve had just started, he had started Brewer Clifton at the time, but he had also started his winery Palmina, which was dedicated to Italian varieties. He's been a proponent of Italian varieties in California for as long as anyone in sort of once the cal-ital movement died, Steve helped.
We had to kill that off first, yeah.
When did it die?
Well, no, there was Steve can probably talk more to this and we can get into it, but there was a cal-ital movement when Mondavi had planted Sangiovese. They just unfortunately planted it in Napa where it doesn't do well, and they just couldn't make it kick off. And all the people that planted Sangiovese didn't fail. They pulled it up, and the cal-ital movement sort of dwindled. But that did not stop this guy from being dedicated to Italian grapes. And Palmina Wines has been around since the early 90s.
95.
And then a couple years ago, which he'll talk about, he rolled it into Vega Vineyard, which is the former Mosby property that he is now the wine director at. And so the wines have not changed, just the label. And I won't give any more away because we have him here today. So Steve, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. How are you?
They're good. Getting back. Thumbs up all around.
Cool. So thank you for having me tonight. Thank you for taking a chance on all these wines. Thank you for just being here to experience something different and new. And we're gonna have some, we're not gonna have Chardonnay or Pinot Noir. We're not going to have Syrah Viognier. We're not going to have Sauvignon Blanc. We're going to have Malvasia Bianca. We're going to have Vermentino, some Dolcetto, some Barbera, and some Sangiovese. So Sangiovese is probably going to be the most kind of known varietal that we're going to have, or the most, prolific, especially in California. But I take a little twist on Sangiovese, and Allison alluded to that. I started Palmina back in 1995.
Hold on one second. I'm going to interrupt you, Steve. I'm just going to, before you tell us your story, Chris has a very important question he asks everyone.
It's
please.
Because we always start by asking you, what is the most memorable bottle of wine that you ever opened?
Oh, I have two. Okay. But I'm gonna focus in on one. The one that I'm not going to focus in on is a 1971 Borgogno Barolo, which was amazing, and it was even more special once I found out that my very, very, very dear friend Luciano Sandrone was responsible for making that before he started his own winery in 1978. So when I tasted that wine, it changed my life. When I found out that he was responsible for making it, it became more profound. But the wine that stopped me in my tracks completely and kind of, it's so memorable, like it's as though I can still feel the glass in my hand and I can still taste the wine, was a 1986 Masi Amarone single vineyard, Mazzano vineyard, 100% Corvina. And I'm not a big Amarone guy. It's not like I like sweeter wines. This was perfectly balanced. It was the acidity to the sweetness, to everything about it was just perfectly balanced. And it's from a larger producer, but it's a smaller production wine. And it just goes to show you that you can't always judge books by their cover. Like just because it's Masi doesn't mean it's a big, production wine. They make these really small handcrafted things. And the really interesting thing is, over the course of my lifetime, now one of my very best friends is the director of enology for Masi in Verona. And so it comes full circle. Yeah. And we actually met on projects that we both had in Argentina, but he's now the director of enology for Masi. So it's a fun, both of those wines, when I tasted them, I had no idea that I would be closely connected to people that were involved with those projects. And when I found out that Luciano had actually made the 78 Barolo, it was really profound to me. Luciano welcomed me in Piemonte and really taught me a lot about like the Piemontese like structure of winemaking and all that. But he also came over and he would spend 2 weeks. He brought his grandkids, they'd stay at our place. He would go through every row of my vineyard with me. He would taste through every barrel in my cellar. It was a really profound friendship that we had. And unfortunately, just 2 years ago, he passed away. So.
All right. Well, Allison,
Did I answer your question?
Yeah. I was going to say, I've had 100% Corvina before, but I've never had 100% Corvina Amarone. That feels like a rarity, because normally you get the Rondinella
and the Molinara, exactly. And the Mazzano vineyard is a really unique vineyard. It's 100% Corvina, and it's all done a passamento, so it's not a traditional Valpolicella, but it's 100% Corvina Amarone, and it's one of the most beautiful bottles of wine I've ever had.
So as mentioned earlier, the first wine we're going to be opening up and tasting tonight is the 2023 Malvasia Bianca. And Steve, before you were so rudely interrupted by me with our question, you were kind of going through your history of winemaking, so we'll just let you have the floor and go. Clearly, you're not going to have to fraud and pry answers out of.
So I started Palmina back in 1995, and it was.
Just bear that in mind. No, I'm kidding.
It was dedicated exclusively to Italian varietals, and still is. Palmina is a big part of my life. I moved up to Santa Barbara County truly to start Palmina, and I took jobs within the wine production world and worked my way up to assistant winemaker at Rancho Sisquoc Winery, and then had my first winemaking job at Beckman Vineyards, and started Palmina while I was there at Beckman in 1995. Started Brewer Clifton in 1996. A lot of people are freaked out by that. They always think that Brewer Clifton that it came before Palmina, but actually it came a year afterwards. It's a lot easier to sell Chardonnay and Pinot Noir than it is Barbera, Dolcetto, Nebbiolo, Malvasia, Bianca, maybe. And so Brewer Clifton really exploded and became kind of a phenomenon. And yeah, I can stand back from it now and see that and say that it really exceeded all of mine and Greg's expectations, and continues to be a hugely successful brand, and nothing in the world that I'm more proud of than being a part of that. So with Palmina, good, please.
I was just gonna say, I want to roll back a little bit and find out, what were you doing before you moved up to Santa Barbara County? Were you involved in the wine industry? And at what point did you decide, wine is what I want to do? Is it something that you knew at a young age, or was it something that you kind of evolved into?
Great question, because I come from a long line of strict Southern Baptists. There was never any alcohol in my house whatsoever. And not that it was particularly frowned on, it just wasn't part of the culture at all. I started playing music when I was 18 years old, just a year out of high school, and went on to be a drama major and communications major at USC. But I played music for that whole time, and it actually, in a strange way, became lucrative. It wasn't just another garage band that like fell by the wayside. We did a lot of work we were all surfers, and so we played at all of the professional surfing was just like coming online at the time. And so they were having contests up and down the coast of California. And after the contest, it'd be like an award ceremony. And so we were the go-to band, because we were so integrated into the culture, to play at all of these things. And so we were playing at all these surf contest awards parties. And this guy comes up to me after one of the parties and said, "Hey, I'm starting this new thing. It's an upstart. We're going to be on this'll date the whole period." So, but he said, it's an upstart. We're going to do like a channel on cable that's exclusively sports. We're going to call it ESPN. So anyway, we ended up doing a ton of soundtrack work for the burgeoning ESPN. Anything that was water related, anything that was like ocean related, we did the soundtrack work for. And so it actually became lucrative. We got to tour with the Chili Peppers and with the Untouchables and with let's see, great dance. Anyway, so it's
what I will say is, Chris just tried to sing. Steve actually has a really good voice.
What was the band? Can you say the name?
It was called Secret Service.
Okay.
Yeah. And so Secret Service, we played with Fishbone and the Untouchables and the Chili Peppers and so on and so forth. And Gallagher the comedian and all that kind of stuff. We opened for anybody that would have us come.
Which Gallagher? Joe Gallagher, or when his brother hijacked the act?
No, the original Watermelon Man. Yeah. So so anyway, when you play music for a living at that age, between, let's see, that was between 18 and 27 years old. What it means is that you work in a lot of restaurants.
Yes.
Because you'll have high times with music, but then you have to support your music habit. And the velvet rut of being a server is the perfect way to support something like music. I quickly figured out that wine was my strategy for making, better tip averages. And that's really why I started learning about wine, was just because I needed to up my tip averages. And the more that I learned about wine, the more that I dug into it, I found like a real connection to history. And history is by far my favorite subject in the world. And so it drives me all the time. I love his, if I were not a winemaker, I would definitely be a high school history teacher. I mean, that would be like my dream job to retire into.
Not a high school music teacher?
No, you know what? I love music, but it's a little too personal to me. I want the spotlight on me. Sorry.
He's not kidding, because he actually, like, the History Channel is the channel that's on his television
24 hours a day,
Yeah.
all the time. Yeah.
I don't want to know. But
So yeah. So
so you worked in a lot of restaurants. Were there any
worked in a lot of restaurants, but I figured out that
restaurants?
wine was going to be my way of raising my tip averages. And so the more I learned about it, I figured out that it was connected to history. That like really made me dig into it deeper. And so the deeper I got, I started not only using it as a server's tool, but when music kind of fizzled, it finally kind of fizzled out. There was like infighting within the band, and it ran its course, is really what it did. And when that happened, I started buying wine for different restaurants in Orange County, and specifically Italian wines. And I always worked in Italian restaurants, and I learned more about Italian wines. I had an opportunity to go to Italy with my sister. She had moved there. She married a man from Milan, and so I went there in 1988. Changed my life. I thought I was going over there to help my sister, but it actually changed my life in magical ways. I saw a different sort of approach to life, and what the table means, and what meals mean, and what wine can be, and how it can create memories, and just create situations that are beyond what you can do without it, right? Wine can take something and exalt the entire evening. And it really opened my eyes. I was using it as a tool before that, and after that I saw it as something that was like part of a ceremony, that maybe the last ceremony that we all really engage in, which is dining, which is dinner, which is getting around a table and eating food. It's the one thing that we all can agree upon. We all have to eat, and it's this perfect place to have conversations and make memories, whether it's a holiday or just a Sunday afternoon, And so it became really important to me to integrate that into what I was going to do in the future. And so as I got deeper into wine and wine knowledge, I really decided I wanted to make wine. And so I actually had a girlfriend, and she said, "Hey, what are you going to do with your life? You're running a nightclub right now. I'm not going to marry a loser." And and so I said, "I think I want to make wine." And she said, "Well, you can't," which are dangerous, dangerous words. She said, "You can't." And I go, "What do you mean I can't?" And she said, "Well, you have to either be born into a family that does that, or you have to have a degree from college, and you don't have that degree." Okay. And then I was talking to members of my family, my sister and my mother and father, and they were like, "What are you gonna do, now that music's over?" And I go, I think I'm gonna make wine." And they're like, "You can't." And I go, "What?" And, well, you either have to, be born into a family that does that, or you have to go to school for it. So now I have to, right? I don't have any choice. Now I have to prove all these people wrong, that I'm gonna do this. And so with a vengeance, I moved up to Santa Barbara County, and I got a job at Rancho Sisquoc Winery, and it was whatever they would give me, literally. And it was working in the tasting room. And I took a job working at Downey's restaurant in Santa Barbara, because they had the most expensive menu items when I walked around to all the restaurants. So I'm like, okay, that's my place. And so I became a head waiter at Downey's, and I became tasting room staff originally at Rancho Sisquoc, pushed my way up to assistant winemaker, got my first winemaking job at Beckman, and
And you proved them all wrong.
I did. Well, yeah, I did. And you know, by the time that it happened, it wasn't nearly as important to prove them wrong. It just, I was happy with the decision I had made. And you know, I have to give credit to one person. Many people might know Bruno D'Alfonso. Bruno D'Alfonso was the winemaker at Sanford Winery for 30 years. He has his own winery, D'Alfonso Curran, with his wife, Chris Kern, who unfortunately has pancreatic cancer right now. So we have to say a little prayer for Chris. But in 1989, I came up to Santa Barbara County with another friend who was a server at the restaurant that I was both buying wine for and sell, and you know, and I was a server at. And we went to Sanford Winery, and I met Bruno D'Alfonso. And if anybody's ever met Bruno, he's the roughest teddy bear in the whole world. He's like, I said, you know, I asked my friend Chris Burrows, who was at the bar that day, is that Bruno? And he's like, yeah. And I said, I want to meet him. And so Bruno came over, what's up? What are you doing? Yeah, Bruno's this really rough teddy bear guy. He said, Burrows, get 4 bottles of wine and 4 glasses and put them in my car. So anyway, we went up to the Sanford and Benedict barn and we sat, the 3 of us, and drank those 4 bottles of wine, which I don't recommend to anybody. Yeah, I do actually. But and he talked me into going into the wine business. He told me that it was possible. He gave me the courage and the confidence to make the leap and to do it. And now I don't know if I blame him or if I'm really in, you know, like, if I owe everything to him, one of the two. So, but that's how I got started in wine in Santa Barbara County. I had an opportunity to go to Calistoga at the same time as well. It seemed really impacted. It seemed very industrialized. It seemed like everything was kind of already sort of structured. And when I moved to Santa Barbara in 1991, there were 24 wineries. And there's just over 400 now. So it was the wild, wild west. And it was somewhere that I thought I could start my own thing and make some sort of mark. So that's what I endeavored to do.
Should we talk about the first wine?
Yeah. When did you taste your first Malvasia Bianca?
Yeah.
Did you remember?
So
it's a segue. It's a segue.
I have a very dear friend, Joe Bastianich, who is very involved in the food and wine industry on all sorts of levels, and lots of other fun things as well. But he was starting his winery in Friuli, Venezia Giulia, in 1999, and we had met, and he had tasted the wines that I was making in California. And he invited me to come to Friuli and see what he was doing there. And that turned into like a 3-year endeavor of me helping him start up his winery in Colli Orientale. And so I tasted my first Malvasia Bianca there. It was actually Malvasia Istriana, which is what this clone is. It's actually Malvasia Istriana, but I decided at some point that I didn't need to make it any more difficult than it already was, you know?
Actually, on that note, just a really interesting fact, like historically Malvasia was made all over. It was made in Greece, it was made in Croatia, it was made in Italy, in the south of Italy, in the north. And anytime a wine had that kind of sweet floral note, they called it Malvasia. And so the confusion is that when you get Malvasia in the south and you get Malvasia up in Istriana, meaning it came from Istria, meaning Slovenia, Croatia, and that part of Italy, they're not the same grape and they're not even related to each other. Malvasia is a generic name that it would make sense to us.
Yeah.
We knew that this was Malvasia Istriana, but again, nobody knows that. Everyone thinks Malvasia is Malvasia.
Right. And so you can say that Malvasia is grown in all 17 different regions of Italy easily, because there is a Malvasia. And, you know, the interesting thing too is because it's grown in all 17 different regions, and it's grown in Greece, and you can search the origins all the way back to Georgia. So some people say Malvasia, some people say Malvasia, some people say Malvasia. There's every different pronunciation of the word Malvasia, and they're all correct because it's from every different dialect and every different, all the different nations as well. So whenever somebody says it, Malvasia, Malvasia, like it's all good, I happen to have learned about it and learned how to make it in Friuli Venezia Giulia, and it's Malvasia Bianca or Malvasia Istriana. And so I make both this still table wine version and I make a sparkling version because the bubbles really, it's a method champenoise, and it really makes it just like jump out of the glass. It's incredible, like how floral it is with all the effervescence of sparkling.
How many people here thought that the wine was going to be sweet when they smelled it? Oh, see, you're also savvy.
Yeah. See, typically it kind of messes with your head because you smell it and you get all these flowers, you get all these, these floral notes, and you immediately think it's going to be sweet. And then the wine's completely dry when you taste it.
And now when you make this wine, it's all in stainless steel?
Yeah, every year I see where the parameters are, like, what are the numbers, how high is the sugar, what's the acid and all that. If the acid is really, really high, then I'll put a portion of it into neutral barrels, and that'll let it breathe a little bit and open up. And so I'll usually do maybe like 70% stainless steel, 30% neutral barrel. If the wine comes in more exuberant, I'll keep it all in stainless steel. It has to be kind of determined by how it came in. This is Malvasia Bianca 2024. And so it's just gone dry. And I have this all in stainless steel because it came in at 24 bricks and it's a little bit more rounder and bigger already. And so I don't need to give it that creaminess or roundness through barrel. So I'm going to keep it in stainless steel. But other years when it's a little more steely and more angular, I'll put some in barrel just to let it go through a little bit more malolactic and give it a little bit more flesh.
Well, this has great acidity.
So the one that you're tasting right now is 100% stainless steel because that's how it came in, and that's how we went with it.
It's like super floral on the nose, but then it's like pineapple, lemon, lime on the palate.
Yep.
I think it's so fun because it just lends itself to so many different foods. Anything seafood it's going to work with, but seared scallops are like a real favorite. Anything that's shrimp driven is going to be great. In that area, when you're in Trieste, they'll have like a huge bundle of anchovies, and they'll batter them and fry them as a ball. It sounds so crazy, but it's one of the tastiest things in the world, especially with Malvasia Bianca.
Yeah, that sounds delicious. I mean, I can remember oddly one of the first Malvasias I ever had was at the old Wild Horse Winery with Ken.
Yeah.
It was one of his heirloom varietals, one of his few heirloom whites that he did. But I remember it being incredibly floral, but yeah, just bone dry on the palate. Where in Santa Barbara are you sourcing these grapes from?
So I grow them right here where I have production, right at what used to be the Bridalwood Winery, which is now the Ynez Ranch, and we've just gotten our full certified organic growers certification, and we're going for regenerative farming as well. And I planted an additional 3 acres at Vega, which is in the process of the same certification.
Nice.
So I've got 2.5 acres here, and I've got 3 acres at Vega. And so, Malvasia is a big part of, my production, and especially since I do still and sparkling.
You're staking a lot on it, which is good. And because it is one of those whites that I felt like there was a period where I started to see more and more of it, but it's tapered off. And because it's so interestingly aromatic, it's kind of a Gewürztraminer, but without the sweetness in terms of the aromatics and whatnot. So I thought it would be a much more crowd-pleasing grape that would, get a little traction.
Well, it is interesting that, I used to purchase Malvasia, from other growers, and I had to grow my own because everything's being bought up. So I know that it's more popular than when I started making it back in 2007 was the first year that I made it. It's a lot more popular now than then because nobody else was buying it. Nobody knew who else to sell it to. So everybody was calling me saying, do you want more? And now I had to plant my own in order to have some. So.
Wow. So you have how many acres at the Bridalwood property?
Now I have 5, well, I have 2.5 here at the ex-Bridalwood property, San Ynez Ranch. And I have 3 acres at Vega Vineyard Farm.
That's cool. Is it a difficult grape to grow? Does it like the heat? Does it like the cool?
Whether it's the same grape in all the different regions and all that, I think the beauty of it is how easy it is to grow. And the clusters are I have a really large head, and the clusters are about the size of my head. So it literally like these huge clusters.
Literally, sorry, literally a big one. Got it. Okay.
So I have a big head too. Yeah.
If anybody in Santa Barbara is gonna have a big head,
I mean, like I wear a really large hat, is what I mean. So, but it's interesting when the grapes come in. The entire winery, when you're pressing it off, smells like this glass of wine. The entire wine, and while it ferments, it's so perfumed, like you can't miss it. Like when you walk in the morning, you know that Malvasia Bianca is fermenting, right? And then with other grapes, it's like, oh yeah, there's white wine fermenting, it's whatever, but it smells just like the grape tastes. And that's one of the most interesting things because I don't know, the wine doesn't taste exactly like the grape does. Sauvignon Blanc, not at all. Vermentino, none of them. This tastes just like the grape tastes. And it's so unique. It's so interesting in that aspect.
Yeah, immediately when you've got a glass of Malvasia Bianca. Or Malvasia Bianca.
Malvasia, yes, exactly. We're gonna have to work on that.
Yeah.
It's the Paso Robles thing. It's just they're both correct. Everything's correct.
Yeah.
I'm actually not going to correct him because they're all correct.
Yes, perfect. And it's funny when you were talking about the Malvasia being connected to the 17 region, being different grapes.
Yeah.
It reminds me of being in the South where they ask you what kind of Coke you want, and you say, "Oh, I'll take a Pepsi or Sprite or whatnot." But Coke is their generic term for a soft drink.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. It's like a Xerox or a Ziploc or whatever. Yeah.
When you're studying Italian wine, you learn about all these grape families that are related. They share some DNA or their mutations are clonal. And Malvasia is like, I think Trebbiano is the other one where they're not related, but there's like Trebbiano D, Trebbiano Day, Trebbiano da Abruzzo, from all these places, but they have no familial relation. And Malvasia is one of the most tricky because I think there are something like 10 or 15 different Malvasia names.
For sure. And there's Malvasia Rosso, and there's a Malvasia village on an island in Greece, and there's a Malvasia village in Georgia, and they're named after the wine that came from those places. It's people like this wine a lot, and so and I think you're absolutely correct. It's just the grapes that take on the characteristic that they love so much with the florality and all that, whether it's white or red, they give the moniker Malvasia.
Yeah, and then think of it if it goes by the coast, you think of salinity, and you get salinity with the floral, and then you pair that with fresh seafood. I mean, you're in like happy summer.
And thank you, because that's a perfect segue. We're gonna have Vermentino next as well, but the grapes that I choose to grow here are specifically chosen because they grow near coastal areas, and they take on characteristics of the like oceanic soils, oceanic breezes, of just being coastal. And what I think that people forget a lot of time is that we're the only place in the Western Hemisphere, the only place really in the world, maybe the only other place that I can think of is Galicia in north western Spain, where you're bordered on 2 of your 4 sides by a major body of water, So here in Santa Barbara County, we have the Pacific Ocean, the largest body of water in the world, both to our western side and our southern side. So we have breezes that are coming constantly off of the Pacific through, from the west into our transverse ranges further inland than anywhere else on the Western Hemisphere. But we also have the ocean to the south. And so all of our climate, all of our weather, all of our wind, everything comes off of the Pacific Ocean. And all of this area was under the Pacific Ocean for millennia. And so our soils are very oceanic. They're full of diatomaceous earth. They're very saline. And so I look for grapes that grow well in those traditional dynamics. So Malvasia istriana is from the area right at the top of the Adriatic, where Slovenia and Croatia and Italy all kind of come together. Think Trieste, everything from like Venice to Trieste, and then down the Dalmatian coast. Yeah. So you've got all that Mediterranean influence coming up to the Adriatic, and all of that, like all of that wind and breeze, but also the soils are very ocean or saltwater specific. When we get to Vermentino, it's even more.
I need you to get on the boat and travel all the way down to the island of Sardinia now.
Yeah, so it gets even more dramatic. We're going to go completely from the tip of the Adriatic around the peninsula, the whole boot. We're gonna make that tiny little piece between Calabria and Sicily, and we're going to go up to Sardinia. And we've got a little island off of the west coast in the Tyrrhenian Sea rather than the Adriatic, but a place again that's completely surrounded by a large body of salt water. The Tyrrhenian Sea, open to the Mediterranean, open to the Atlantic. And so everything about the island is oceanic. The soils are really similar. There's a lot of sandy loam, but with diatomaceous earth, but ocean breezes, salt breezes. And so with Vermentino, the next wine in particular, I think both Malvasia and Vermentino, you want to taste a little bit of salinity in the finish for it to be truly characteristic of the varietal. Vermentino even more so. Vermentino, like, just if it doesn't have that saline quality in the back, then it's not varietally correct. So
Now,
like Sauvignon Blanc, more melon with that saltiness in the back, and just without the grassiness.
Now, I totally agree, because when people say they love Sauvignon Blanc, and I say, what else can you have? If you like Sauvignon Blanc, drink Vermentino. Now we're thinking of Vermentino and Sardinia, but there's also this grape called Roll in the Rhone Valley.
And Favorita.
And Favorita,
Yeah.
which
In Piemonte. Yeah.
As well. So.
In Liguria, the grape Favorita is actually Vermentino, and in France, Roll in the Rhone Valley, or the Rhone, is Vermentino. So if you ever see a bottle of Roll or Favorita, it's this.
And that's 2 L's and an E for roll, because that's the way they roll.
ROLLE, exactly. So I love this wine, and because of its origin place and just its characteristics, again, it's screaming for seafood, and not that you have to be particularly pigeonholed with that. It's great with any salad. It's great with any vegetarian dish, or any vegetable dish works perfectly. And there's such a mishmash of culture, especially in Sardinia, of French and Spanish and Italian and all that, like ratatouille sort of dishes and all that work really, really well. But ultimately, like this is looking for shellfish, it's just screaming, I want,
Oysters on the half shell.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
Sardines straight out,
Ceviche.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got great acidity. It's got this nice chalky acidity on the finish.
This wine got us invited to the international Vermentino competition in Sardinia, and so we'll be going in May I'm honored. I get to both show this wine and I get to judge some of the Italian wines. They won't let me judge the international set because I'm part of it.
Steve, I'm gonna throw the offer back at you. If you need a Sherpa.
Exactly.
So speaking of Sherpas, because again, transition, I want to go back to 1995. So you tried to launch this Italian wine brand. Did you have a specific variety in mind or a couple of specifics, or what was your goal when you launched Palmina, and also how did the Palmina name come about?
So Chris, that's an excellent question. And at the time,
hard journalistic work. Allison gushes about the wines. I ask the questions people want to know.
At the time, it was really difficult to find Italian varietals that were being grown in Santa Barbara County, specifically Santa Barbara County. There were some things that were grown up north and all that, but I was here and I had committed myself to here. And so there was a guy, Joe, give me a minute. Well, I'll keep telling the story and it'll come to me. Joe. Okay. Anyway, he had Sangiovese and he had a little bit of Dolcetto. Yeah. Joe Carrari. That's what I was trying to think of. He was one of the first growers here. Santa Barbara was originally planted to grow grapes for up north. People in Sonoma, Napa, all that, they needed more grapes, but they wanted to plant them in a less expensive place. And believe it or not, Santa Barbara had less expensive property at that time. And it was a really good, it was a known grape growing area before Prohibition. But it didn't survive Prohibition.
24.
24 we started in 91. I'm assuming by 95, another 5 or 6 had come along.
So anyway, the grapes that were being grown here originally when I came up here in 91, that most of them had been grown to sell to the market up in Napa and Sonoma for people that wanted more grapes. And it was just this burgeoning little community of people that were starting to make wines here. Like I said, 24 different wineries, and it was kind of growing little by little. But people were talking about what should be grown where, because even a heralded vineyard like Sanford and Benedict, which is known so positively for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, at the time had Riesling and Merlot and like other Cabernet Sauvignon being grown in it. And further inland, the Firestones were planting, Rancho Sisquoc was planting. The first actual post-Prohibition planting was on the Santa Maria Bench, and it's called the Nielsen di Mattei vineyard. And that was planted in 1966. So everything kind of started from that point post-Prohibition on. Sanford and Benedict was planted in 72. There was the Ballard Winery. Anyway, there's a long history. But
when did Mosby plant?
So that's an interesting property because that's the Rancho de la Vega, and it was an established vineyard in the 1880s. And so it continued to have vines, whether it was like an active production of wine or not, it has some bumpy spots. but it continued to grow grapes from 1880 on. Mosby bought it. It was Vega Vineyards in the early 60s, started up again in 1966, same time that Nielsen de Bottet planted. And Mosby bought it in, if I'm not mistaken, 72. And he continued it as Vega Vineyard until 78. And at that point, he changed the name from Vega Vineyard to Mosby.
So the Italian varieties that were planted there, he put in, or they were originally planted?
He grafted what was originally there over to the Italian varieties that he was really interested in. And that's where he and I bonded, were over these varieties that like Montepulciano and Sagrantino and Nebbiolo and, you know, all these things. So yeah, exactly. And, you know, what's interesting is when I moved here, all of us would get together, the winemakers and the cellar workers and all that, we'd get together at the hitching post years ago. And, you know, back then you could have every winemaker in the county and all their cellar workers at one long table because there just weren't that many winemakers, you know? And we'd get together and we'd have long conversations about what grapes would work and what should be grown. And I was making an argument back in, you know, 94, 95, 96, that Italian varietals would really thrive here. There are two different ways to look at wine as far as like what you can grow, what you like, or you can grow what the place likes, right? And so growing what you like is about marketing. It's about like more people drink Cabernet Sauvignon, more people drink Pinot Noir, more people drink Syrah than drink Montepulciano or Sangiovese or Dolcetto or Barbera. But what does the place want to grow? What are you going to get the best yield off of every year? And what's going to grow the most sustainable fruit? You know, if you're growing Pinot Noir, most years you get 1.5 tons per acre, 2 tons per acre. Great. It's going to be really expensive. I don't think that the Italians, when all the Romans were throwing grapes hither and yon, were like, well, I really want something that has low yields and that is really difficult to grow. And, you know, they were like, we want something that goes with our food.
Piemonte,
That, like, you know, makes a lot of grapes every year, right? And so it's two different mindsets of how you look at it. And I was looking at it from what would thrive here? What would, and I've proven it over time, it might not be the most marketable wine possible, but it definitely, I can consistently get 5 tons per acre and concentrated fruit. All these wines have this flavor and this kind of quality to them, and I don't worry about having fruit or not.
no, excellent.
I'm just pouring a little Dolcetto because
I think it's time. I think it's time for Dolcetto.
It's a little sweet one to go out there with.
except that's not really the name.
You know, that is the funnest story. And it has exclusively to do with dialect. You know, Italy wasn't Italy. It wasn't like an established country until the late 1800s, and it didn't have a singular language until it was unified. And so everything was dialect, and Piemonte was part of Dauphine, and it was part of the Savoie, of the Savoy kingdom. So it was both French and, you know, what we now consider Italy. And so the dialect there is heavily influenced by French. So anyway, Dolcetto, yes, if you literally translate it, means little sweet one, right? But what it really means in dialect is sweetheart or cara mia. Like it means the one I favor, the one I love, because it's really easy to grow, it's really easy to make, and it's really easy to drink. And so it's their sweetheart, and that's what Dolcetto really means.
Now, I mean, I've taken a sip of this. This is the 2023.
Correct.
It's got a rich roundness on the back of the palate. Was
Yeah.
that the vintage? Is that how you made the wine? Was it a warmer vintage? Is that why? Or I mean,
No, it was just it was definitely a vintage thing. Dolcetto can take on a lot of different characteristics. This one's ripe and exuberant and very dark fruit, not as red fruit as some of the other vintages. And I you know, that's what I love about wine is, you know, I don't want to make Pepsi. I want to make wine, you know? And so, you know, if you're making Pepsi, you're trying to make it taste like Pepsi every single time. I'm trying to take a snapshot of a year with a grape, right? So it's like having a Polaroid camera and taking a picture of this year with this particular grape. And that's what each different wine is. And it's an expression of that year and what's possible. And like I said, you know, like with Malvasia, I'll decide, am I going to use some barrels this year? Am I going to do it all stainless steel? How did it come in, you know? And with this Dolcetto, it came in with exuberance and all this ripeness. And I'm like, let it sing, you know, let it be what it is. You can always restrain things, but why? You know, why not let it be?
was 2023 a hot year?
No, it wasn't a hot year. 2023 was extremely unique in the fact that, you know, typically I'll start picking Pinot Grigio and other whites like the last week of August or the first week of September. I didn't pick a single grape until October 3rd.
Yeah, it was a
That's right.
it was a very late year because we had a lot of cool weather in May and June, and I think they even didn't have bud break until
Oh, that's right.
like,
Bud break was super
You
late.
know, it was really late as well because of all the rain. And we had it was our second year of extreme, you know, extreme rain for California, you know, like living in a desert, that's extreme rain.
what we needed for the drought.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really interesting because all the wines we have today are 2023 vintage, and obviously we haven't tasted the other two reds, but the whites have such high acidity, which I know is the grape, but also vintage does play a part in that. And yet this has such dark fruit and more brooding that you would think that you can't believe they're from the same year because
Yeah.
No, I totally understand, but this was
Yeah.
this didn't hit like physiological ripeness until the very end of October. And so it took on like all this softness, you know, like the pHs went up. And I could have knocked it way back with, you know, by acidulating and all that. But like I said, why not take a snapshot of that year and let it be what it is, you know? And next year may have like a higher acid profile and all that. And that's a snapshot of that year, you know? And I think that's what makes wine interesting is that you're looking at each year individually for each varietal.
Yeah. No, this is super interesting because there's almost like a zinny quality to it in terms of its fruitiness and just how much that like really ripe fruit shines through. I'm interested, is Dolcetto typically a grape that is harvested early or is it something that's harvested later? Because this to me, like I look at this and I think, oh, this must be a later harvest with that much ripeness on it. But again, like you said, that could just be the snapshot of that year.
Yeah, for me, I mean, let me look.
and also Dolcetto is not a grape that typically is very high in tannin.
No, and it's typically grown in the like most fertile soils because the idea was, you know, you put Nebbiolo in your worst soil, your Barbera in the next tier, and then the Dolcetto just kind of fills in wherever it goes.
Yeah, you drink Dolcetto and Barbera while you're waiting for your Nebbiolo to ripen.
So this isn't extremely like high alcohol or anything. It's so yeah, exactly what you're saying. So in Piemonte, everything is a hill, right? Like there's not a lot of flat ground. There's a hill that comes to another hill and then another hill. And all the south facing slopes are planted with grapes. And so the very bottom is planted with Dolcetto, and the middle is planted with Barbera, and the very top of the hill is planted with Nebbiolo. And that's how you drink the wines. Dolcetto is Tuesday night wine. It's lunch wine. It's even breakfast wine for a lot of people, and I have a story about that. So you drink that all the time. And Barbera, you drink Friday night for date night, or you drink it like for a little bit more special occasion. Because Nebbiolo is like anniversaries and holidays, and you shouldn't drink it before its 10th birthday and all that. And so they drink in that way up the hill, and
They also say that Dolcetto, like if you go in, there are specific areas that Dolcetto is not just grown on the flats. I mean, Dolcetto has DOC and DOCG status.
No, it's not. There's nothing flat, so it can't be grown on the flats.
Like,
It's at the bottom of the hill.
They're on the hills,
It's at the bottom, the coolest area, the most frost potential down there.
For sure, yeah.
But it's interesting because it does mean little sweet one for like sweetheart. But I was also told when I was there that it has to do with the softly, sweetly rolling hills that the Dolcetto is planted on.
And Nebbiolo, I've been told it's both because of the fog that comes in, but also the foggy, like, element on the grape skins of the grapes and all that. And there's just like here, there's a story for every Piemontese person that walks down the road,
Italians are storytellers. I don't find that. Not at all.
Hey, Steve, can you talk a little bit about where you get this and all the vineyards you work with? Like, because I know you manage vineyards that.
So this is 100% estate grown. This is both off of the Vega Vineyard and Farm estate that's just off of Santa Rosa Road, and also off of the Walker Vineyard that I've had since 2010 and have farmed since then. And so it's a combination of those two, and that's why I put San Ynez Valley on it, is because it's both from the Los Olivos district and from the Vega Vineyard and Farm property blended together.
And is the Vega Vineyard, is it technically within the Santa Rita Hills AVA?
No, it is 4 miles east of Santa Rita Hills. The first vineyard on Santa Rosa Road that's in the Santa Rita Hills is Rio Vista, and that's where I source all of our Chardonnay and Pinot Noir.
Yes, this wine has some sweetness, but it's not residual sugar.
Correct.
It's the ripeness of fruit.
Lots of fruit, yeah.
But yes, you are correct, Patty. What would you have with this Dolcetto?
I'm tasting it right now. I'd love to have something eggplant with it. I think that'd be fantastic. It would be great with a pork dish. It'd be great with, like, in Italy we'd have stinco di maiale, like a pork shank or something. But here, like, I'd make pork chops and some roasted vegetables to go alongside.
Yes, we have one vote for potato chips. This is one that I could even see with like some stewed beef, like,
Yeah,
it's marinated.
I also think it screams for pizza, and not a lot of wines do. I'd steer people towards beer or Lambrusco with pizza, but this works really, really well with pizza.
There you go. So
it fits in all the places that Pinot Noir would drink. You can have it with salmon. You can have it with, like any number, like chicken. You can have it with pork or beef. It'll fit all those places. You just don't have to think a lot about it. You just open another bottle and continue on.
As you start to finish your Dolcetto and start pouring the Barbera, I thought maybe you could explain. Now, we know that you're at Vega Vineyard and Winery, and some people have been there. You said right off of Santa Rosa Road when you're coming up the 101. You're at the former Bridalwood property, which is the San Ynez Ranch. Did I get that right?
San Ynez Ranch.
San Ynez Ranch. Where you make your wine, and you had moved your production over there before Vega came about. But you've kept your production over there.
Correct.
And then you also you have long-term leases of vineyards that you farm that are part of the estate that are all part of it. So if you can explain to everyone how Vega Vineyard kind of came about and how that works in with what you were doing before.
Yeah, so Palmina, had been around for 34 years.
Oh, and I forgot you didn't answer Chris's question about the name of Palmina.
We'll get to that in a moment.
Okay, yeah. We got a little time.
But so Palmina had been around for a long time, and that means that you've created a lot of relationships and partnerships and situations, and I was very fortunate. What used to be the Bridalwood property, which is a beautiful, one of the most amazing properties in the San Ynez Valley, when it was purchased by a good friend, and I was able to take over the production space there. The friend that bought it wants to use it for philanthropic purposes and for events, but not be involved in the wine industry. And so I was able to lease the production space of it and continue on with that. The vineyard has been leased by a group called the Coastal Vineyard Care Associates, really good friends of mine that I've worked with for over 30 years. And we're converting it to a completely regenerative farming place. A lot of regenerative farming is taking place on 4 and 5 acre vineyards. This is 100 acres with 45 planted. It'll be the largest regenerative, like full project in in California. The only other one that rivals it is Cobbles Creek, and we're doing it in partnership with them. And so we're learning from each other and doing all that. But so it's a really fun, interesting environment to be in. It's we're constantly growing and learning and teaching, and animals that are in the vineyard. We don't we only use animals to mow. We only use animals to fertilize. We use only indigenous plants for cover crops. It's a whole different kind of way of looking at it, beyond kind of biodynamic and that sort of thing. It's a whole different way of seeing it, and we're incorporating that at Vega as well. But so because of all those previous relationships, I had 3 other vineyard plots when I partnered for Vega. We brought everything together. So it's everything that Palmina was, plus everything that Vega brought into it as well. And so it's just a growth, and it's everything that I ever wanted Palmina to be, because Palmina was supposed to, it has always been about making wine that was supposed to be at the table, and wines that really work with food, never wines that are bigger, more bombastic, or bigger than the food that you eat. It's all about a symbiosis with food. And so now we have an organic farm. We're a farm to table restaurant. We're a full service restaurant that has brunch and lunch and dinner. So lunch 7 days a week, brunch on Saturday and Sunday, and dinner Thursday through Sunday. But everything comes from our own garden, our own organic farm, and it's just
fantastic.
Thank you. And it's so interesting, because people are so used to thinking that a winery, if they're serving food, it's going to be like a charcuterie platter, but we have a complete menu. Please go to Vega Vineyard Farm as the website and look at the menus, because they're extraordinary. And we rewrite the menu every 6 weeks according to what's coming out of the farm. And so it's myself, the owner, Jimmy Loizades, and our chef, Christopher Rossi, who's amazing. And the 3 of us sit down and we compile menus that utilize everything that's going on with the wine with everything that's going on with the farm. And so every recipe has a wine that's incorporated into it, and everything goes with the wine that's from the property.
And this is really special, not just because in theory it's a beautiful idea. It's one of a kind in San Ynez Valley.
It is.
It's one of a kind in a lot of places. There are a lot of places that have restaurants, but when you can say that it's coming from the farm, and it really is in the regenerative model, developing its own ecosystem, and everything comes from it feeds itself, it supports itself, and we benefit from it. And that's the beauty.
I think when you put all the different pieces together, it's one of a kind in California.
Yeah.
I really think so. You know, like it's very unique that a winery in California on a vineyard has its own full service restaurant. And then it's really unique that it has its own farm that it pulls everything from. And then it's really unique that it's all organically certified and it's regenerative. And that, you know, like when you put all the different layers on top, I think
And
it's a very unique situation.
can you tell them what's in the works, the exciting part of the future plan?
So we've just opened up Pop's Place, which is 6 cabanas that are surrounded by the vineyard, and it has a great play area because we wanted kids to have a place to go as well, and to be more family oriented. And so we have 2 kitchens now. We have the very high end, like full service restaurant, and then we have a family restaurant. And the next sort of venture is that we're building cabins, and eventually there'll be 40 to 50 cabins on the property where, you know, people can have like that regenerative farm, vineyard, food experience
Oh,
all in
agritourism.
one place.
You're moving into the agritourism business.
Absolutely, yeah. And looking to all the models in Europe, and especially with, you know, our concept is very Mediterranean. We kind of take a circle around the Mediterranean. Our food has influences of Spain and France and Italy, and definitely Middle Eastern and Greek and Moroccan. So we could kind of swoop around the Mediterranean and work with anything that like works with wine.
Nice. Were there any properties in Italy specifically that you kind of modeled this business after, or modeling the vineyards after? Or?
You know, my favorite place in the world to eat, my favorite meal that I've ever had, and you know, I've been fortunate enough to eat in some fairly, you know, high-end places, California or France or wherever. But my favorite place to eat in the world is a place called La Subida, which is in Friuli, Venezia Giulia, in the village of Cormons. And it's the most incredible dining experience I've ever had in my entire life.
It's amazing. I've eaten there.
And on that property are 20 little cabins. It was originally a hunting lodge, and it's surrounded by vineyards. And so, yes, that's always been in my mind, you know, for what I wanted to see happen.
I've stayed there too.
Fantastic.
And to top it off, when I had dinner there, I got to have dinner with Grosvenor.
Oh, how cool.
So it was pretty extraordinary, I must say.
Interesting to say the least.
And so
Yasko is
well, I was with his daughter at dinner. I met him, but at dinner it was with her. And it's a really special place. It's a family owned. It's
the Cirque family are some of my favorite people in the entire world, and they're some of the most talented people in the world, and they're one of the closest knit families that I've ever known.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're extraordinary people, and what they do there is a model for like what should be done in the world.
Yeah.
I knew a woman named Julia once.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my connection.
So Barbera, I love Barbera, and the reason that I love Barbera so much, it's one of my favorite grapes, and it has been since I started making it back in 1998. It has all this color, it's got all this acidity, it's got all this flavor and fruit, but it has absolutely almost no innate tannin to it. So it doesn't dry your palate. It doesn't have any of those factors that make it off-putting for fish or shellfish. It's a red wine that's a maverick. It's completely, you can take it in places that you could never think about taking other red wines because it doesn't have all that tannin.
Right. No, it's really bright and lovely, and yeah, I get some almost like if you remember the old sweet tart candy, like the cherry.
Yeah.
Sweet tarts is exactly what I'm
lots of acidity. I remember doing a dinner in New York at Alain Ducasse, and I was really like honored to be doing a Palmina dinner at a Land Ducasse, right? And I walk in and there's a menu set, on the plate, and I see, because I'm not going to tell a land what to pair with my wines. I'm just going to walk in and see what he has put. And he had Barbera with lobster fra diavola. And so if anybody saw me, I probably just went completely white. Lobster with deep red wine, like, I don't know. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever tasted in my entire life. It was the best pairing that I've ever had, and completely changed my mind about like the wine that I was making and what it could go with. So it was really fun, really interesting. And since then, I've understood Barbera's capability.
What is Barbera's capability?
Well, you can go anywhere from, like drinking it with a lamb shank or like a piece of like ribeye, because it's got enough acidity to cut through all the fat of that. But you can put it with lobster in a spicy, like chili flake red sauce, and it'll still like fit, and it's not going to make the lobster taste metallic because it doesn't have all that tannin that's drying your mouth and creating that obstruction for the fish. So it's just got this pure fruit and acidity, but it doesn't have that tannin drying. Then that tannin drying is what creates that metallic flavor in your mouth when you put red wine with fish. So because the skins of the grape simply don't exude, or give any tannin to the wine, it's more malleable and more usable in a lot of different situations.
Well, I wouldn't think about it. I mean, I can almost picture having some like sea bass.
Yeah.
A little chill on this, and how perfectly, because the acidity would just match that.
Dolcetto and Barbera both work really well with a little chill on it, especially for like an alfresco lunch or something. So are there some comments that I'm not seeing?
Not a private note. I think Patty likes your wine a lot.
Are you guys having fun? Is everybody having a good time?
They are enjoying it, absolutely.
Thank you.
In Piemonte, there are kind of two main areas producing Barbera as a DOC.
Asti and Alba, for
Yes.
sure. Yeah.
Do you find this one, you try to orient it more towards one or the other, or?
He orientates it to the San Ynez Valley.
Well, of course.
Yeah, that's the weirdest part about, making these varietals for the last 30 some odd years. Like, I have no intention at all of making emulations of Italian varietals, and I try to make translations. And what's interesting about translating, anybody that endeavors to speak more than one language, there's so many idiomatic expressions that are difficult to translate within language, right? There's so many things that people say colloquially. That's a difficult word to say. But anyway, especially after a little bit of Barbera. But there are so many things that people say that are just unique to the place where they live. And so, and the same is true about wine. When you're trying to translate Barbera from Piemonte to California, the idiomatic expressions are the soil, the aspect, the proximity to the ocean, like we're coastal and we're not maybe as continental and that sort of thing. Like, there's just all the age of the soils. Like, we're just in a different place, right? So if I made a wine that tasted like it was from Piedmont, I would have completely missed the mark.
Right.
I have to make a wine that tastes exactly like it's made from here, right? Because that's the endeavor in Piedmont, right? If you're in Barolo or if you're in Monforte, if you're in Barbaresco, if you're in Asti or Alba, you know, in more general terms, you're striving to make a wine that tastes like Asti, or you're striving to make a wine that tastes like Alba. If I'm in San Ynez Valley, I have to strive to make a wine that tastes like San Ynez Valley.
Steve,
So,
you want to hear something really profound?
huh.
Carey had a very profound statement here. He said that oddly, those like you who do translations often come closer to the old world taste than those who are trying to simply replicate it.
I actually think that's true, because what we're trying to figure out is understanding, right? You're not trying to emulate, you're trying to translate, you know? And so when you translate, you're trying to come to the closest understanding possible, not just a you know, like a emulation. So because you'll never emulate, you know. The best thing you could possibly do is pay homage to the benchmark and then move it forward.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because at least here in California, it feels like most of the Barbera being grown, or at least the ones that I've encountered, are in warmer areas or those with wider diurnal temperature shifts. I'm thinking primarily the Serra Foothills, Placerville, Shenandoah Valley area. So I'm interested in, you know, how you think Barbera adapts and changes when planted in a cooler environment like Santa Barbara.
Well, I'm super sensitive to diurnal shift. And so I understand what you're saying about warmer locations. And Barbera is much akin to Syrah. I always say that Barbera is what Syrah wants to be once it grows up. So, but that's another conversation for another day, right? Diurnal shift is interesting because there are lots of places where it's grown. It's a more malleable grape, and it can be grown. You know, at one point, Barbera was the #1 red grape produced in California. And 90% of it went into hardy Burgundy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Sylvaner was the #1 white grape produced in California, and it went into California Chablis, right? So what it tells you is that those two grapes can grow in the Central Valley, they can grow in the coastal regions, they can grow in both cool and warm locations and still produce a very serviceable product, right? Now, if you have to add acid or remove acid, or you know, whatever it might be, they still work within the parameters of wine production. Now, when you can make Barbera, see, I think that we have a really dramatic diurnal shift here, even though we're the coolest grape growing region in California, at least for like Santa Rita Hills. You know, we'll have like 70 to 80 degree days, and we'll have 40-degree nights. So a 40-degree diurnal shift is huge. A lot of other places they'll have large diurnal shifts on a yearly basis, but not on a daily basis, right? So they'll have warm summers with warm summer nights. We have warm summer days, cold summer nights. Mm-hmm. And so we have like this shift that goes on all the time. That's what really allows grapes to hold on to the acidity that's necessary. So, you know, you're holding on to the acidity over here, and you're allowing the grape to physiological ripeness. You're allowing the sugars to go up without the acidity dropping out. And that's what's really what you're looking for. When you've got warm days and warm nights, even for a month or two in the middle, then you've got sugars that are going up and pHs that are raising with acidity dropping out, you know, and so you've got flaccid situations. none of us want that. So
Nobody wants flaccidness.
I can't think of a good use for that word. So
I don't think it's meant to be. We don't normally have 5 wines, so I'm just going to keep it moving along so that we still stay in our
let's do
time
it.
helping out here. But I love the Barbera. I think it's tasting.
Thank you. It's our #1 seller, and it outsells, you know, every other red pretty much by double.
Just got great
because of
acidity.
all the food that we make, and it's just fun to drink, you know.
Yeah, it is kind of that red wine you can take through a meal.
Yeah, I think it hits that sweet spot for consumers, despite, you know, the weird cult of cab that's happened. I actually think consumers do like a little bit more acidity in their wines, and that brightness. I mean, I think that's why Italian wines have always had that place at a table. You know, I think there are a lot of people out there who will reach for a bottle of Chianti, you know, if they're just having dinner with friends or whatnot, because it's inexpensive, but it's got that great acidity, and it's going to pair with just about anything. I think that's kind of a nice transition into our final wine tonight.
That to me is the allure. Is that they're wines that are meant for the table.
Right.
You know, they're not meant to be wines where you line up 8 different wines and you taste them side by side, and you kind of judge them as to what hits you over the head the strongest. You know, like they're wines that that need food. You know, each one of these wines is so much better with just a little bit of salami, a little bit of cheese, a little bit of bread, a little bit of anything that like kind of, you know, changes your palate.
Like an antipasta salad.
There you go.
I mean, right there.
But I got a little salami somewhere in here there we go.
Yeah.
That
All right, so I gotta tell you this story. About, so it was 1999 when I had started Palmina in 1995, and I finally like settled on making Sangiovese as kind of a mainstay for the brand, right? That originally that was the thing that I could get the most of. So I made a Sangiovese Merlot blend originally it was called Vino da Tavola della Costa Centrale.
Oh, of course.
There's not a lot of people that are going to walk into a restaurant and order a glass of Vino da Tavola della Costa Centrale, right? So then I proposed to my then wife, why don't we just abbreviate it to VDT? And she said, no, that's not a good idea. That sounds like something you have to take penicillin for. So anyway, I changed the name to Olivos, but the whole premise of the wine was in the beginning, back in 1995, there wasn't great Sangiovese here, and there wasn't great Merlot here, right? And the super Tuscans were like super hot, you know, in Bulgari and all that kind of stuff. So I decided I need to use an Italian approach to not having the best grapes possible. So I started doing a passamento, like making Amarone, like making like what's done in Valpolicella. And so I started drying all of the Sangiovese. Originally I dried all of it, and then I realized that's too extreme. So I started drying a percentage of it, like 30% of the Sangiovese, and I'd rehydrate it with the regular Sangiovese, the regular, you know, like fermented Sangiovese. So I dry it for 100 days, and I bought mats in Italy, and I brought them here, and that wine is still one of my favorite wines that I've ever made, and I'm gonna make it again. I'm gonna bring it back. I eventually centered on calling it Olivos because I was getting it all from one vineyard called the Olivos Vineyard, but I'm gonna make that wine again. I love that wine. But then I started making straight Sangiovese because I had a vineyard that I'd finally planted that was it was all Brunello clone. And I thought this is the wine that I want to present as Sangiovese. So I remember going into a wine shop up in Napa Valley, and I was showing all my wines, and I said, hey, would you like to try my Sangiovese? And the man that was buying at the wine shop said, you see that rack over there that's full of Sangiovese? He said, when every one of those bottles is gone, I'll taste your Sangiovese. So that's like, because what happened was Sangiovese exploded. Piero Antinori came to California and he decided to do the Atlas Peak program, and he was gonna like grow Sangiovese in Napa Valley. And who would be better at growing Sangiovese than Piero Antinori, the guy that grows more Sangiovese than anybody else in the world? But who has more at stake for saying, oh, we tried, but Italy's the only place you can grow Sangiovese. So I'm not trying to disparage anybody. I'm just saying that Wine Spectator wrote an article saying that cal-Italians should be illegal, and it almost killed my brand. It almost destroyed Pulmina.
Yeah, it was a pretty bad time.
Yeah,
Cal-Italian became.
They wrote an article saying that Italian varietals shouldn't be grown in California. And then there were 11 wines that were rated. They were all Sangiovese and they were all from Napa Valley. And I agree that Napa Valley is not a great place for Sangiovese, but I had Sangiovese that I thought was really good. So I renamed it as Ynez. Ynez is the name for is the word for 11 in Italian. And I was watching Spinal Tap at the time, and their amps went to 11. Yep. And so I named my wine Ynez.
Nice.
And so then I could walk in. I didn't put Sangiovese anywhere on the bottle, nowhere on the label, and I wouldn't tell anybody what was in it. They would taste it and they liked it. And that was Ynez. And so that's how I sold Sangiovese in the early 2000s, was by calling it Ynez.
I know Chris is going to have to run out because he does have to drive to Paso. We're not ending, and I'm sitting here.
I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm actually handing control of the chat over to Allison. I'm going to be terrified for the next 3 hours as to what's going to happen. So the rest of you, keep her in line.
No, but before he leaves, can you just quickly say the Pulmina name, just so he knows, unless you know, but the origin of the Pulmina name.
Oh, so Pulmina was, I had, for all intent and purposes, a grandmother. She wasn't my grandmother by blood, but she was my grandmother regardless. And she was my Nonna Paula. And I knew her, throughout my childhood as that. But when I moved up to Santa Barbara, her husband had just passed away a few years before I ended up moving up here. And she gave me a place to stay while I kind of got on my feet and all that. She was from Southern Tuscany. I'm really, really condensing this. So
that's okay. I appreciate it.
Anyway, Paula was amazing. She taught me all about Italian mindset, Italian cooking, but more than that, just like an attitude. And so shortly after, I kind of got on my feet and started working in the wine industry, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She was in her late 70s at the time. And so I ended up taking care of her through her illness. And when she passed away, I was the executor of her things. And I found her original birth certificate. She was from Southern Tuscany. She had 8 siblings. And all of them, when they moved to America, they moved originally to a little place in Ohio called Dilly's Bottom. It was a coal mining town. But they renamed all the kids. So Gino became Gene, and Stefano became Steve, and Pulmina became Paula. So when I found her original birth certificate, her name was Pulmina. And I had these first wines in the barrel in the basement of my house, to tell you the truth, which was kind of illegal. But she was a Gemini, and she was born on June 7th, and she passed away on June 10th. And so I used the Gemini symbol to honor her and called it Pulmina when I started the thing.
That's lovely.
Palomino is still a huge part of what Vega is.
And I have spent a lot of time inside of Dilly's bottom, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And on that note, goodbye.
That's a story for another day.
That was really frightening.
Here's Sangiovese, guys.
Yeah, no, this is really beautiful. Now, again, is this a wine? Does it see neutral oak? Is it big barrels or what?
The only thing that sees Bote is Nebbiolo and Barbera. So this is all in 60-gallon and 500-liter, puncheons or barriques, but all neutral. And I don't like using a lot of new oak. Especially with Italian varietals and especially with Sangiovese, I don't want to mask what the fruit characteristic of Sangiovese is. I don't want to add a slick kind of, vanilla thing to it. I want it to be that acidic, red fruit that's gonna come through for food. And so I kind of steer away from new oak as much as I possibly can.
Yeah, you let the grapes shine through.
Exactly. Yeah.
Before jumping on to any other questions or comments, there is a question. Patty and David wanted to know what a super Tuscan is. And I mean, I can give a quick little thing, but Steve, you might want to jump on, is that, in Italy, there's always been that in Italy, in every region there are rules to how what grapes are grown, the yields, how they're made, when they're picked and everything. And the Super Tuscans are a name for the rebels in Bulgari who decided to start blending Cabernet in with their Sangiovese. And so they became the Super Tuscans. The Super Tuscans became far more expensive. That's not what they were when they started.
And the government decided we're not getting enough tax revenue off of this, so we need to reclassify. But what's really interesting about it is if you look at the entire picture of Tuscany, right? So even Chianti and Chianti Classico, there was a kind of like Bordeaux, there was a ruling in the 1850s of the recipe that you had to use for Chianti Classico, and it included Sangiovese had to be 85%, and there were 5 other grapes, Malvasia Bianca being one of them, just to bring it up again.
But not Istriana.
Not Istriana, but Malvasia Bianca, yeah. But Ciliegiolo and some other grapes, right? So to make Chianti Classico, it had to be 85% Sangiovese, but it had to have these other 5 grapes according to the recipe of Baron Ricasoli from 1855. It was very, regimented. So some people in Chianti, they wanted to make 100% Sangiovese. I don't want to put Malvasia Bianca and these Ciliegiolo and these other grapes in there. I just want to make it Sangiovese, and that was heretical, right? And then some other people were like, I don't want to use those other 5 grapes. I want to use Cabernet Sauvignon or Cabernet Franc or Merlot, and that was heretical. And so there were all these different things going on, but the wines that were being made were beautiful. And so all of a sudden there's $350 a bottle wines, or back then $150 was like $500, for a bottle of wine. But there were all these beautiful wines, and they had to go under the listing of IGT, which is they had to go under the table wine listing in Italy because they didn't fit any of the rules. And so this term came up for these heretical wines, and it was Super Tuscan. And there were wines we call them the Ynez. There's Salaya, there's Ornellaia, there's Sassicaia, there's all these Ynez out there, and they really changed the whole view of what could be made in Tuscany. And and then for me, it made me think, what can I do in that same vein now that the door's open, And so that's why I make Super California Tuscans, because
Are you doing a lot of blends, or do you do mostly single varietal wines?
my favorite wine that I make right now, I make for myself completely. It's not made for anybody else. It's called Dal Prado. And Dal Prado is 35% Sangiovese, 35% Cabernet Franc, 15% Cabernet Sauvignon, and 15% Malbec. And it's just this, Santa Barbara County is one of the most unique places. Well, it is, in my opinion, after working in Italy and Argentina and Walla Walla, Washington, and all the places that I've been blessed to have worked, it's the most unique grape growing region in the world. You can grow Chardonnay and Pinot Noir on the western side in the Santa Rita Hills and then on the Santa Maria Bench. You can grow phenomenal Rhone varietals in the center of the county, and you can grow unbelievable Bordeaux varietals on the far eastern side in Happy Canyon. So you've got Ballard Canyon and Los Olivos district to grow all these Italian varietals and Rhone varietals. You've got Santa Rita Hills on the far western side to grow Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, some Riesling and great Syrah as well over there. And then Happy Canyon to grow Cabernet and Cabernet Franc and Merlot and Malbec and all that. So there's no other place in the world that within a one AVA you can grow all those things. There's nowhere else in the world within a 60-mile radius that you can grow all of those varietals and do them all well. And so when I was looking at what I wanted to make, I have a lot of people coming up from Southern California, from Los Angeles and Orange County, and they're usually kind of on their way to Paso Robles or Napa Valley. And they're like, oh, I like these big wines. And I'm like, I can do that. And I wanted to show what Santa Barbara County is capable of and still keep it within my parameters of food and wine. I don't want to make a big, huge, bombastic wine. I want to make something that kind of fulfills that desire for a fuller wine, but still has the acidity to go with food. So that's Del Prado. And so Vega is the Rancho de la Vega. De la Vega means from the meadow. If you translate that to Italian, it's Del Prato.
Prato would be priest. Sorry, Del Prato.
Yeah, Dal Prato.
Del Prato. There you go. Any other questions? Because you guys were throwing the questions out a while ago. No questions. So what would you pair with your Sangiovese?
So with this Sangiovese, I want like beef, I want like a really I want beef that's cooked over an open flame, preferably over a wood flame. I think that each wine, the way that it's produced and why the grape varietal was selected in each of the different parts of Italy was because of their menu. So I really think, in Tuscany, you eat a lot more beef than you do in other parts of Italy. And most of it's cooked over a wood fire. And that's why you need Sangiovese with all of its acidity to cut through the fattiness of beef. And then that's why it's produced in oak. And the oak goes with the wood treatment of the food. So the wood treatment of the wine matches with the wood treatment of the food.
And also because these are
Bianca Fiorentino is what I'm talking about.
Yeah. With just olive oil and salt.
Exactly.
Very simple. No, and I think these are super food friendly because they're just pure fruit. They're not I wouldn't say manipulated, but they're not
adorned is what it is.
They're not adorned with like oak and too much of this or too much of that. It just lets the fruit shine. So
oak and all that, that's like earrings and necklaces, you know what I mean? And well, I'll leave it at that.
I know. Well, I know that Chris had to run out. We only ran over a little bit, but we had 5 amazing wines. I don't know if there are any questions. If anyone wants to jump off and ask Chris, ask Steve any questions or talk about, but I know that Steve, you have a dinner coming up you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I do have a Nebbiolo dinner that I'm doing at Vega Vineyard Farm on November 22nd. And so I'm going to debut my new 2020 Nebbiolo for Vega Vineyard Farm. But I'm also going to pull out Palmino wines from 2005, 2007, and 2009. Some things that were like 94s and 95s from Robert Parker and Antonio Goloni. I'm going to pull out some older Ynez and Barbera for the dinner as well. I've curated a menu with our chef Christopher Rossi, and it's the best of Piemonte. So we're gonna have like tartare crostini, and we're gonna have vitello tonato, and we're gonna have agnolotti del plin and beef braised in Nebbiolo, and all sorts of really fun things for the night.
But you don't have, you're not bringing in the Piemontese beef.
I'm actually trying really hard to do that. Yeah, I'm trying to make sure that we have that for the evening. Yeah. Thing about the night is
November 22nd.
November 22nd. So it's a great way to kick off a week before Thanksgiving, kick off all the holidays with a big Nebbiolo flash. And it's gonna be a really fun dinner. And I'm gonna pull out some really fun surprises and library things that haven't been open for a very long time.
And if you want a place to stay, Sideways Inn is just up the street, another
Just
exit.
up the street, the
wine.
Marriott, and we've got the Hampton Inn as well. Solving's just around the corner. And we have, two places on the property, and I don't know if they're filled yet or not, but they're Airbnb available.
They have a very large Adobe that sleeps
14.
14.
Yeah.
So really fun for parties. But yeah.
Thanks, you guys. Thank you so much.
A lot of money.
It's been so fun to thank you for listening, and thank you for going through the wines with me. I really appreciate it.
Question. Hey, Steve, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I don't have a question. I just want to compliment you for doing what you do. My wife and I are Italophiles. We love Italian wine. We've been to Italy. We've been to 15 regions of Italy, and I hope to get to the last 5 before I cash in.
Wonderful.
What you have captured the whole essence of what Italian winemaking is like, but it's here. It's right here. You're not trying to make Burgundy when you're not in Burgundy. You're
No.
trying to make Italian wine that reflects what's happening right here, right now. And these wines are great.
Thank you. And I do want to welcome you into my cellar, and like have an experience that's beyond just like tasting wine. And every time that you're in Italy and you're with the people that you're tasting with, it becomes more than what you'd expect it to be, and you learn a little bit more, and you get to know the person a little bit more. And to me, that's what wine's all about, is creating a memory, creating a connection.
Yeah. Well, years ago, before we moved out here, we made a pilgrimage to Palmina, but now we're going to make a pilgrimage to Vega.
Please do. Please do. And I get to, like I said, I get to help write the menu every 6 weeks, and we change it every 6 weeks. It's my dream come true.
Oh, we're coming.
Well, I
Truly
have to
dream
say,
come true.
it's at Palmina, it was always great to go when he had a club party, because he'd be making pizzas, and because he's a really good cook. But now at Vega with the full menu, and as Carrie and Cameron had said, I mean, the restaurant is far better than it needs to be for a winery restaurant. It really exceeds on all levels. It's really a delicious, seasonal, fresh vegetable, dishes. It's a really
But
special.
we've got great lamb chops, and we've got like fantastic, like every type of dish you could possibly want. Right now, my absolute favorite is the black cod dish. It's just amazing.
I mean, there's also, I've had great flatbreads with seasonal toppings, the pastas, everything is really good.
Everything's made in-house. We're also, we're the exclusive organic farm for Caruso's, which is the Michelin star restaurant in Montecito, at the Rosewood Miramar Resort. And So I work really closely with Massimo Falsini, who's been a friend of mine for 25 years, and we grow all of the vegetables for them as well.
Wow. When I introduced him, I said he's one of the nicest guys I know in the wine industry. And see, I think he proved it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. It's been a wonderful experience. I'm really glad that we had this time together.
I'm gonna turn off the recording. Steve, if you can stick around a second, we'll just see if anyone else wants to speak off recording.
Of course.
But just to wrap up, thank you guys for joining us. Next month, we are doing Reason Wine, RZN. We'll be sending out that email very soon. And March 29th, 2025, Festival of Forgotten Grapes, the second annual. Save the date. I hope that I got everything. I was not quite prepared to have to give the updates, but let me just see. Reason Wines, which is out of kind of your same area, Steve. So
yeah, totally.
So we'll see you for
really, really fun wines coming out of there
for the next one. And thank you for joining us tonight. And see you in March.
Ciao.
Grazie, buonanotte.